31 minutes before the actual launch time. That's a race between that front reaching here and getting the Apollo 12 off on the way to the moon. Dan Rather, I gather you're there at the Kennedy Space Center, there at helicopter side.
That's correct, Walter, and it's pretty drippy out here at the moment. It's been raining for about the past 15 minutes. Everyone who has one has his umbrella out, has his raincoat on. As you see, the President has his raincoat on. Mrs. Nixon is raincoatless, although a Secret Service man is opening up an umbrella now for both Mrs. Nixon and Richard Nixon as they step off the helicopter. Here in the VIP area, everyone is on his and her feet. The Girl Scouts behind us, Walter, a few moments ago were singing songs, America the Beautiful, Up with People, and This Land is My Land. Mrs. Nixon and the President taking their time, working in the rain, shaking hands with those in the crowd as they walk a distance of about 35 yards from the presidential helicopter to the seats, which are in the open. They are not covered from the rain. Just underneath an American flag, those seats surrounded by young people. Now, whether some arrangement can be made to give the President and the First Family a cover from the rain when they get in those seats, we'll simply have to see. That is to say, some cover other than umbrellas. Several Secret Servicemen are standing by, flanking the seats with umbrellas. A moment ago, 4 cushions were brought out just before the rain started and put in the row of seats where the President is to be seated. Then as the rain started, the Secret Service men hustled in and picked up the cushions to keep them from getting rain soaked. President Nixon, as you see, smiling, seems to be in an extremely good mood. If you'll recall, Walter, during the Apollo 11 shot and in the aftermath of the successful Apollo 11 shot, those who saw the President both in private and in public said they had seldom seen him in such an up mood. He was obviously, as most of the rest of us were, tremendously enthused by the success of the Apollo 11 shot. The President and the First Lady have stopped now to chat with someone in the crowd. It's not unusual for President Nixon to recognize someone in a crowd and pick out someone in the crowd that he met 4 or 5, 6 years ago. He has a phenomenal memory for names and faces. Occasionally you will talk to someone who will be awed by that fact, saying, you know, I met this man back in 1962 or 1960 and haven't seen him since, and he picked me out of the crowd and called me by name or mentioned my hometown. The President appears to have on a brand new raincoat. A long list of VIPs are to be seated in this section. Some of them are over in the Vertical Assembly building, touring with Vice President Agnew at the moment. Arnold Palmer, the professional golfer, Mrs. Jack Nicklaus, wife of the professional golfer, they're here. Jimmy Stewart, the actor, John Meekum, oil man and owner of the New Orleans Saints professional football team, to mention only a few who had special invitations to sit in the VIP area near the First Family. Actually, the President and Mrs. Nixon have made it only about a third of the distance from their helicopter to where they're supposed to be seated in the rain. The rain has let up as we've been talking here. It is now very fine mist, what the English call a mizzle. It's now falling. And if it doesn't get any worse than this, Walter, the President, Mrs. Nixon, and other members of the official presidential party won't get very wet, considering the umbrella help they have. Mrs. Nixon, about a week or 10 days ago, I suppose it was suffering from a virus. And note that she does not have on a raincoat out here. The First Lady has not been feeling quite up to par for a month or a month and a half. Although in the past week we were told by spokesman on the First Lady's side of the White House that she was feeling much better, and she appeared to be in very good spirits when she and the President were in Florida this past weekend. The White House says that President Nixon will return to Washington and be in the White House this afternoon, and that tentative plans still call for him to remain in the White House at least through Saturday. There's been some talk of the president possibly going to Camp David, his Maryland mountain retreat, some 70 miles outside of Washington tomorrow. All of that has been by way of speculation. I repeat, the White House says that tentative plans continue to call for the president to be back in the White House this afternoon and to be there tomorrow. White House News Secretary Ronald Ziegler says he does not, I repeat, does not expect the president to have any comment to make whatsoever on the series of anti-war moratoriums and demonstrations scheduled for Washington today and tomorrow. The President and Mrs. Nixon now moving a bit faster along this walkway. They're walking on a slightly raised wooden walkway, leads from their helicopter landing site to the place where the first family is to be seated. The crowd is 5 and 6 deep on each side here. Admission, of course, is by special credential only. Mrs. Nixon, we see, takes a deep breath, and if we read her lips correctly, said, "My, isn't this wonderful?" And then she spots someone in the crowd she recognizes. Says hello. President Nixon using the double handshake technique, working with both hands. Someone hands him an envelope, an Apollo 12 commemorative envelope signed. The president signs it. Says, "Hello, how are you?" That's the president's back to the camera at the moment. Of course, his hands reaching over, shakes hands with one of the NASA employees with a white helmet on. Seems to make a special point of trying to shake hands with each and every NASA employee that has one of those workman hats on. Mrs. Nixon, for those of you who didn't see her in color as she stepped off the aircraft, is wearing an aqua coat dress, black pumps. The president dressed in his, can't see under the raincoat, I believe it's a blue suit, that's his usual dress. Walking just in front of our microphones now at the moment. We've been instructed not to try to interview the president as he walks by. White House says he simply wants to talk to the people. We'll stick our microphone in and see if we can hear anything in there.
The president is chatting with people and signing.
Can't pick up much of that. The president stops to say hello to a pretty lady and to sign an autograph there. Mrs. Nixon preceding him. They're edging their way very slowly. The American flag, which is just above the place where the president is to be seated, is standing out, but not standing out to indicate that the wind is blowing very hard. The wind appears to be a little gusty at this moment here. The mizzle continues, but it isn't not a hard rain at all.
Dan?
Yes, Walter?
I'm going to interrupt you here. We just had further word from Jack King at Mission Control Center here. The weather is still giving them considerable concern as this front moves in over the Cape, or toward the Cape. And as they say, it's a race between the front arriving here and the launch scheduled for 22 minutes from now. They have decided that instead of making their judgment at the 24-minute level, which has now been passed by a couple of minutes, they are not going to make the decision until 10 minutes before launch or another 12 minutes from now. They have conferred with the crew of the Apollo 12, astronauts Conrad, Gordon, and Beam, who have been there in their spacecraft for the last couple of hours. They have conferred with them. They agree with the procedure that they will wait until 10 minutes before launch time to make a weather decision. If that decision is to delay the start of the flight, it does not mean that the flight will not go today. They have 4 hours and 28 minutes of window, so-called. But the flight does have to go by 3:50 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon if it is to make the landing area on the moon in the proper lighting conditions. And if the lighting conditions are to be proper for recovery of the spacecraft, should it run into difficulty in the launch phase, and to have the weather conditions proper in the Pacific for return. All of those things, the lighting conditions in all three places, back here on Earth, in the Atlantic, out on the moon, and in the Pacific in the landing area, have to be right. That's why we have windows. If they do not get off by 3:50 this afternoon...
Did not discuss this, expressed it with great candor. And then the President, Ziegler said, quote, has not talked about news coverage since 1962. Presumably that was a famous California news conference when the President said that was his last news conference and himself delivered himself with some strong thoughts about press coverage. Ziegler said he did not know who on the White House staff the Vice President discussed his speech with, but Ziegler insisted the President had not seen an advance copy. Ziegler was asked whether he personally agreed with Agnew's television criticism, and he replied, this is Ziegler, I don't express any feeling about news coverage as White House press secretary.
The President now, Herb, is up on the on his platform there, and there's a cheer from the crowd, a very wet but a happy crowd. Everyone hoping that despite this heavy rain, despite the heavy cloud cover, that this shot will not be postponed.